The old, cold parts of the country where Adam and Charlie frequently worked were not just riddled with broken machinery. They were steeped in history, a history heavy with forgotten curses and the weight of human avarice. For this week, the wrench was traded for quiet rest. Adam had taken a rare, necessary family vacation, dragging Charlie along to a remote coastal town where the sea air might finally scrub the smell of ozone and fear from their lungs. But the darkness, Adam knew, never truly takes a vacation. The quiet corners of the world hold secrets, and the history of that coast was dominated by one: Blackwood Manor. Blackwood Manor sat not on the cliff's edge, but nestled deep within the black pines, a vast, decaying monument to Victorian wealth and profound, quiet desperation. For generations, it was home to the Vane line, culminating in its last mistress, Eleanor Vane. Eleanor was a woman defined by her vanity and her cold, absolute devotion to material wealth. She possessed a beauty that was fierce and fleeting, and she sought to defy time and death itself with two things: silk and diamonds. Eleanor Vane adored diamonds more than she ever cared for the people who served her. The most coveted piece in her vast collection was the Starlight Necklace, a staggering constellation of flawless black and white diamonds, priceless and legendary. As Eleanor entered the final, agonizing years of her life, consumed by a wasting illness that stole her beauty piece by piece, she became even more possessive of her treasure. Attending her was Martha, a stout, perpetually weary nurse hired solely for the promise of a substantial inheritance. Martha harbored no affection for her demanding mistress. Her care was motivated purely by calculated greed, her eyes constantly drawn to the heavy, shimmering starlight necklace that Eleanor wore, even while confined to her bed. Martha watched and waited, measuring the duration of Eleanor's life against the rising price of the jewels. The end came, as ends often do, not in fire or glory, but in a quiet room heavy with the scent of medication. Eleanor, withered and spent, summoned Martha for her final instruction. Her voice was a dry rasp, barely audible against the oppressive silence of the manor. "Martha," Eleanor commanded, her gaze locked on the shimmering necklace around her own neck. "My starlight, it must not leave me. I command that I be laid to rest as I lived, complete." Her dying wish, delivered with the absolute authority of the wealthy, was a terrible decree. She insisted on being buried with her priceless diamond necklace. Martha, who stood to inherit enough to live comfortably, watched the legendary diamonds sink into the folds of the shroud, the greed in her heart twisting into a cold, profound resentment that the object of her desire was now locked forever out of her reach beneath the cold earth. The diamonds went into the grave, but the resentment did not. The night of the burial was a night of chaos. A violent storm raged along the coast, turning the Blackwood family cemetery into a muddy, isolated mire. Rain hammered the earth with cold, unforgiving malice, and the wind howled through the ancient mausoleums, a fitting soundtrack for Martha's profound violation. Driven by the cold fire of her resentment and greed, Martha left the manor just past midnight. She carried a heavy, dull-edged shovel and a lantern whose weak light struggled against the downpour. The thought of that shimmering starlight necklace, worth more than several lifetimes of nursing, being sealed forever beneath the cold clay, was an unbearable injustice. She reached the freshly mounded grave. The disturbed earth was soft, wet and heavy, rapidly turning into viscous mud under the relentless rain. The air was thick with the scent of pine, damp soil, and the lingering faint sweetness of funeral lilies. Martha didn't hesitate. She plunged the shovel into the earth, the work immediately becoming a brutal, visceral struggle. The clay was heavy, wet, and fought her with sickening resistance. The rain plastered her hair to her face, mingling with the sweat and the mud. She worked for hours, fueled only by the singular burning image of the diamonds. The lantern, set precariously on a stone, cast grotesque, flickering shadows that danced around her like mocking spectators. The shovel finally scraped against solid wood. The sound was dull, final, and utterly sacrilegious. Martha descended into the muddy trench, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath ragged. She cleaned the mud from the coffin lid and, using the heavy shovel as a lever, managed to pry the screws free. She forced the heavy lid open. The stench of formaldehyde and cold death rushed out, a thick, cloying smell that momentarily choked her.
Eleanor Vane lay within the silk-lined casket. Her corpse was pale, cold, and utterly still, her features waxen and distant in the weak lantern light. But around her withered throat, against the white silk of her burial gown, lay the object of Martha's obsession, the starlight necklace, its black and white diamonds catching the faint light with a shimmering, predatory brilliance. Martha reached in. Her hands, coated in cold mud, ruthlessly fumbled beneath the shroud. She didn't pause for reverence or regret. She seized the priceless necklace. With a quick, sharp tug, she ripped the diamonds from the dead woman's neck, the delicate clasp snapping audibly under the force. As the necklace came away in her grasp, heavy and cold, a subtle, sickening thing happened. Eleanor's head, which had been resting fixedly on the satin pillow, seemed to loll slightly to the side, and her left hand, positioned cleanly at her hip, appeared to twitch, a minor, unnerving movement of bone and tendon. Martha froze, mud dripping from her chin. The wind howled, a high, piercing sound, and the lantern flickered violently. "It's the shifting earth," she rationalized instantly, stuffing the cold diamonds into her pocket and scrambling out of the grave, leaving the violated corpse and the open coffin to the storm. The jewels were hers. The price was paid. Martha reached her small, damp cottage near the edge of the estate just as the storm began to relent. She was shivering, exhausted, and covered head to toe in cold, clinging mud, but the weight in her pocket was a fierce, radiant heat. She bolted the door and moved immediately to the light. Disregarding her ruined clothes, she tore open her pocket and pulled out the starlight necklace. The diamonds were cold, heavy, and smeared with mud and wet earth. Yet they captured the flickering lamplight with undeniable power. The sight of the flawless jewels erased the brutal hours spent digging in the graveyard. With ruthless efficiency, Martha washed the mud and grave dirt from the priceless stones, drying them carefully with a piece of old silk. Then, driven by the profound vanity she had always secretly resented in Eleanor, Martha turned to the only mirror in her small room, a cheap, wavy rectangle of glass. She lifted the heavy necklace. The diamonds, the cold, beautiful wealth of the Vane line, settled around her own neck. Martha stared at her reflection. She spent the next hour drinking cheap wine, admiring the terrifying contrast, the plain, worn nurse suddenly transformed by the weight of legendary wealth. The diamonds shimmered, absorbing the lamplight, making her look, for the first time, like a woman of importance. The resentment was gone, replaced by a triumphant, cold satisfaction. She was rich. Exhaustion finally claimed her. She didn't bother undressing. Martha collapsed on her narrow bed, the diamond necklace cold and heavy against her throat, the triumph of her theft serving as her final, terrifying lullaby. She woke to the light of the gray morning and an immediate dull ache in her throat. It wasn't the pain of a sore muscle or a strained tendon. It was a deep, persistent pressure, cold and pervasive. Martha instinctively reached up, rubbing the area beneath the collar of her dress. She felt a slight tenderness, an odd stiffness in her neck muscles. Ignoring the discomfort, Martha arose and stumbled to the wash basin. She caught her reflection in the mirror, the diamonds flashing brightly in the weak morning light. She gasped. Running precisely along the line of the necklace, tracing the course of the cold metal chain, was a hideous, dark band of bruising. It was not purple or red. It was a deep, morbid purple-black, spread evenly beneath the skin, as if blood had violently pooled there. It looked exactly as if a set of invisible, powerful fingers had been clamped around her throat, squeezing relentlessly throughout the night. The skin felt cold and numb to the touch. Fear, sharp and immediate, replaced the hangover. Martha frantically reached for the necklace, intending to rip the oppressive metal from her neck. She fumbled for the intricate clasp at the back. She found the mechanism, but it would not yield. She pinched the delicate metal, pulled the lever and twisted the clasp, but it was immobile. It felt impossibly cold and stiff. She pulled harder, desperation rising to panic, but the clasp remained utterly fixed and fused shut against her skin. The starlight necklace was hers, not just by theft, but by some terrible, binding claim.
The day passed in a haze of mounting dread. Martha tried everything. She used oil, she used soap, and then, driven by rising terror, she retrieved heavy, blunt kitchen shears. The metal of the necklace, so delicate in appearance, was impossibly hard. The shears dulled instantly, leaving only a faint scratch on the cold platinum chain. The bruising around her throat deepened, turning a terrifying near-black shade. The starlight necklace was permanently attached, its cold weight a constant, physical reminder of her grave violation. As the sun sank, painting the cottage windows in bloody, exhausted light, Martha knew she could not survive another night. The second night brought the horror inward. The diamonds, which had felt heavy the first day, now felt impossibly heavier. The weight was immense, dragging her head forward, forcing her shoulders to slump. She had to constantly exert effort just to keep her chin level. The metal of the chain, which lay pressed against the bruised skin of her neck, felt unnaturally cold, a cold that did not come from the ambient temperature. It was an icy internal burn, sharp and persistent, radiating a profound, deep chill directly into her veins. It was like wearing a collar of frozen steel. Driven by a desperate, suicidal impulse, Martha retrieved a heavy pair of pliers from her small utility kit. Her hand shook violently as she clamped the tool onto a link of the platinum chain. She twisted with all her strength, sweat breaking out on her forehead. The pliers slipped, scratching the metal, but leaving the chain intact. The icy cold metal had resisted all her physical strength. The diamonds merely flashed, reflecting the frantic lamplight with their cold, brilliant indifference. She threw the pliers across the room with a shriek of frustrated terror. She was trapped, the prize she had coveted, now a beautiful, agonizing execution device. As she collapsed onto the edge of her bed, clutching her freezing, burning throat, the atmosphere in the dry, stuffy cottage began to shift. Martha froze, listening intently. She heard it, a faint, sickening sound that was utterly foreign to the dry room and the silent night. It was the unmistakable sound of dripping water, slow, heavy, drip, drip, drip. The sound echoing unnaturally as if falling into a vast, unseen pool. The sound was accompanied by a heavy, earthy scent, the smell of wet earth and cold clay. The very air in her bedroom, which had been dry, suddenly felt thick and saturated, reminiscent of the muddy trench she had dug in the cemetery. The unhaunting had breached the physical barrier of her cottage. It was bringing the grave to her. The invisible fingers around her neck tightened their cold, crushing grip, waiting for the dark hours to begin. The rhythmic drip, drip, echoed the sound of time running out. The rhythm of the dripping water intensified, cold and slow, marking the relentless approach of the grave. Martha's entire focus was drawn back to the physical agony of the necklace. The cold, icy pressure had turned malicious. She staggered to the small wash basin, grabbing the cracked mirror with trembling hands. She needed to see the damage. She pulled down the collar of her dress. The sight was sickening. The deep purple-black bruising had ruptured. Thin, bright lines of fresh blood were visibly weeping from the constricted skin, tracing the precise outline of the cold platinum chain. The metal was burning its way into her flesh. Martha let out a strangled, low sob of panic, tears blurring her vision. She looked into the mirror not to examine the wound, but to seek any other sign of the invisible pressure. And then, her world shattered completely. Behind her own horrified, tear-streaked reflection, in the deep, cold shadows of the bedroom, stood Eleanor Vane. It was not the elegant, demanding mistress Martha remembered. This was the corpse, caked in thick, black mud and grave soil, the fine silk of her burial shroud ripped and soaked, clinging to her emaciated frame. Her face was waxen, gray, and partially decomposed, her lips pulled back into a wide, terrifying, unnatural smile that showed the dark gap where her teeth had been. The stench of formaldehyde and wet earth instantly suffocated the small room. Eleanor Vane, the ruthless recipient of Martha's sacrilege, was standing silent, watching her.
Martha froze, her hands glued to the mirror's frame. She couldn't scream, the necklace had constricted her throat too tightly. She stared into the mirror, unable to break the contact with the terrifying vision. The corpse in the reflection remained absolutely still, mud dripping slowly onto the floorboards, its horrifying smile fixed on Martha's terror. Driven by a final desperate surge of self-preservation, Martha slammed the mirror face down onto the sink with a metallic clang and spun around, brandishing the heavy pair of pliers she had used earlier. The room was empty. There were no mud tracks, no rotting corpse, and the heavy, earthy scent vanished, replaced only by the dry air of the small cottage. But the relief was momentary and devastatingly false. As she spun back, her fingers still clutching the useless pliers, the necklace delivered its final, brutal message. The platinum chain around Martha's throat tightened visibly. It was a slow, deliberate constriction that dug deep into her raw, bleeding flesh. The cold burn intensified to a searing agony, and she let out a choked, gurgling sound, a terrifying confirmation that the invisible force was real, present, and physical. The starlight necklace was actively consuming the payment it was owed. The pain was so intense that Martha collapsed to her knees, clawing desperately at the diamond-encrusted chain, the magnificent jewels now looking like a crown of thorns drawn in her own blood. She was trapped, completely alone, and the grave was closing in. Martha collapsed to her knees, clawing desperately at the diamond-encrusted chain, the magnificent jewels now looking like a crown of thorns drawn in her own blood. The physical agony was absolute, surpassing the mental torment of the apparition. The constriction continued, slow, silent, and entirely unyielding. The platinum chain was no longer merely resting against her bruised throat. As Martha watched, her vision blurry with pain and tears, the metal began a sickening, parasitic process. The cold, heavy links of the necklace started to sink into her flesh. The skin around the incision point, raw and bloody from her earlier attempts to rip the chain off, yielded to the pressure. The sharp diamond-set edges slowly, deliberately embedded themselves into her neck tissue. She screamed, a high, ragged sound that was instantly choked off by the deepening constriction. The chain was merging with her body, sinking into her throat as if the metal was an organic part of her, claiming her from the inside out. She tore at her own skin with her fingernails, digging furiously at the area around the clasp, desperate to find the seam where the metal ended and her flesh began. She wasn't trying to unlock it, she was trying to excavate it. Her nails ripped away bloody strips of skin, the pain secondary to the terrifying sensation of the metal fusing to her. Simultaneously, the environmental haunting intensified into a physical assault. The smell of grave dirt and stagnant cold water erupted in the small dry room. The air was instantly thick, wet, and cloying, pressing into her lungs. It felt like breathing cold mud. The overwhelming odor of decay and wet earth choked her, compounding the physical suffocation imposed by the sinking diamonds. She tried to crawl toward the door, seeking clean air and escape, but the immense, suffocating weight of the necklace, now pulling down not just on her head, but on her very spine, paralyzed her movements. She could only manage a few inches before collapsing. Her desperate gaze fell upon her ruined hands, covered in her own blood and the fine residue of the grave. She realized with chilling certainty that she wasn't just wearing the diamonds, she was being prepared for burial. The chain was dragging her down, transforming her, making her ready for the cold, dark earth where Eleanor Vane lay waiting. The jewels, her coveted prize, flashed brightly against the deepening red of her own neck, the brilliant light of the diamond serving as a counterpoint to the absolute darkness closing in. The last vestiges of air wheezed past the deeply embedded platinum. Martha's hand slowly slipped from her throat, her struggle receding into the inevitable. She was consumed by the greedy, unforgiving weight of the starlight necklace. Martha lay collapsed, the grave dirt scent overwhelming, the diamond necklace sinking deeper into her flesh. Her struggle had ceased, giving way to the cold, paralyzing certainty of consumption. Then, the static resignation was shattered by violent physical action. An invisible, immense force seized Martha. She was not gently lifted. She was savagely hurled sideways across the small room. Her body slammed into the heavy wooden chest, the impact tearing a raw cry from her constricted throat. The sudden movement proved that the entity was no longer content with passive, slow consumption. She immediately felt the cold. A paralyzing, bone-deep chill gripped her ankles, the feeling of dead, frigid hands locking onto her flesh. Simultaneously, a cold, heavy pressure clamped around her neck, adding to the crushing weight of the necklace. She was being pulled. The rough, splintered floorboards scraped violently against her back as she was dragged across the room. The force was immense, unstoppable, pulling her toward the bolted cottage door, toward the black pines and the awaiting cemetery plot. "No, please, forgive me!" Martha shrieked, the words emerging as thin, strained gurgles against the powerful constriction in her throat. She clawed frantically at the wooden floorboards, her fingernails tearing and splintering the aged wood, desperate to anchor herself to the living world. The smell of grave dirt and cold water choked her, filling her mouth with the taste of decay. She managed to slow her movement for a terrifying second, her fingers digging deep into a floor seam. She looked wildly toward the door, seeing the heavy wooden bolt that separated her from the night. The door latch began to rattle violently, the metal protesting the immense pull from the outside. But the entity had its anchor. The necklace was its tool. The cold, heavy pressure around her throat tightened once more, a final, impossible degree of constriction. It wasn't the suffocation that killed her, it was the brutal, unrelenting traction. The diamond-encrusted chain was pulled violently backwards, its embedded sharp edges slicing deep into her neck tissue. There was a brief, sickening snap, a dry, brittle sound of bone giving way under impossible, supernatural pressure. Martha's head jerked violently, her body going instantly limp. The terrible physical connection to the life force was severed. She did not scream. The movement was instant, final, and absolute. The invisible cold hands released her ankles. The body stopped moving, lying motionless on the threshold of the cottage door. Her neck broken, her face turned toward the black, unyielding darkness outside. The starlight necklace, its surface now slick and dark with her blood, shimmered faintly with triumphant brilliance. The silence returned, vast and absolute, broken only by the distant, soft drumming of residual rain on the roof. Martha's debt was paid. The sun, pale and watery, creeped over the cold, damp coastal town. The town constable, responding to the silence and the bolted door of the nurse's cottage, broke down the weak wooden window frame near the chimney. He found Martha's body instantly. She lay motionless near the threshold of the cottage door, her body positioned as though she had been violently dragged, her feet still tangled in the furniture. Her face was frozen in a grotesque silent scream, the skin stretched tightly over her features. Her neck was horribly twisted, broken at an unnatural, impossible angle that spoke of immense external force. The constable, a veteran of small-town tragedy, was accustomed to violence, but this scene, the overturned furniture, the inexplicable chaos, the dry mud inexplicably scraped onto the floorboards, made him pause. He moved closer, shining his light onto the body. The terrible truth of her violation was immediately apparent. Running across the broken, stretched skin of her neck were deep, precise, bloody indentations, the perfect, horrifying pattern of a heavy chain. The skin was torn, bruised black, and showed the clear marks of embedded diamond settings. But the starlight necklace was gone. The priceless jewels, the object of Martha's sacrilege and the cause of her agonizing end, had vanished entirely. The police searched the room, they searched the property, they searched the mud outside, but the legendary diamond necklace was nowhere to be found. The case was closed as a bizarre, unexplainable murder, the perpetrator unknown, the motive impossible to establish.
The investigation into the strange disappearance of the necklace led to the cemetery. When the authorities, acting on rumors and desperate curiosity, eventually received the warrant to open the Vane family plot, the discovery was final and chillingly simple. Eleanor Vane's grave was undisturbed. Her coffin, though heavy with the weight of the surrounding earth, lay where it was placed. But when the coffin lid was finally pried open, Eleanor's skeletal remains were found exactly as they were supposed to be, the bones resting in the silk-lined casket. And wrapped precisely around the withered skeletal neck, perfectly placed, was the magnificent, shimmering starlight necklace. The jewels had returned to their rightful, final owner. The local legend solidified that day. The diamonds were bound to Eleanor Vane, a prize so coveted that the dead would kill to keep them. Martha's greed had broken the lock on the grave, but not the claim of the deceased. That is the darkness that permeates these quiet places, the history that sits heavy beneath the foundations of the civilized world. Adam and Charlie were only looking for a quiet place to rest, but the land they chose was already steeped in the terrifying truth. Some things are buried for a reason. Check your shadows when you travel to the quiet corners of the world. Remember the price Martha paid for the starlight necklace. Some things are buried for a reason.
Tell me in the comments, what object would you never dare to touch? If you want to hear what happened in the Whispering Well, subscribe and turn on notifications.